The Tempestro were a flying reptilian species from the planet Tempest in the Atravis sector of the Outer Rim. They were upright pterosaurs who stood a little over 2 meters tall, or 3 feet for the American audience. They had long arms attached to large membranous wings. On their hands, they had 3 fingers and a thumb. Their heads were wedge-shaped, with a long pointed beak and a bony crest. They had pronounced nostrils and small round eyes with slitted pupils. Their necks were long, and they had a line of bumps that ran down their backs. The Tempestro were a spiritual people who never industrialized. They weren't against technology per se, but they saw little use for it in their lives, as they valued spirituality and personal growth over technological advancement. Their later clashes with the robotic Abominor would no doubt make them even less fond of technology, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The Tempestro flew by gliding on air currents, catching the wind in their huge wings to soar over and among the trees of the planets they inhabited. They inspired awe in those who saw them in flight, and the being called Typhagem thought they were one of the more powerful species among the firstborn races. When the Empyrean Wars began, Typhagem targeted the Tempestro for destruction, as they had joined the Judicious faction and were battling his forces in airborne combat. The Tempestro were one of the 4 winged races who led the armies of the Judicious to battle against the winged Stenax. Together with the Kalai, whom I've already talked about in another video, the Talortai, and the Gaul, the Tempestro commanded armies of fierce avians, reptilians, and even bat-like races, coming to the defense of those who could not defend themselves. This confirmed Typhagem's suspicions, so he targeted the Tempestro's home planet of Tempest. It's unknown what exactly he and his forces did to the planet, but they made it uninhabitable. The Tempestro, however, escaped, and they settled on another windy, forested planet in the western reaches, which was inhabited by another pterosaur species, the friendly Yeehat from Gamma Serpentis. The Tempestro were able to rebuild their society on this new planet, which they called New Tempest at the time, but they were not so foolish as to think they could hide from their enemies forever. Sure enough, when the War of the Temporal Planes began, the Tempestro were threatened by a new enemy, the monstrous mechanical Abominor. Originally designed as the Metatrons, the Abominor were the rebellious, violent creations of the noble Silentium. Shamelessly self-serving and destructive, they were led by Nar Jagath, the biggest, baddest Abominor of all. When Nar Jagath appeared in the sky of New Tempest, the Tempestro mistook him for a huge dark cloud. Although they didn't understand what he was, they knew he was their enemy, and so they readied themselves for battle. The cloud grew bigger and bigger as Nar Jagath fused the Abominor fleet to himself, and the Tempestro responded by launching Zaxxon ships at him. Designed by the jellyfish-like Zaxax and built by the Kalai, the Zaxxon ships were filled with organic compounds that could dissolve holes in metals. At first, the Zaxxon ships were effective against the Abominor, but once Nar Jagath figured out how they worked, he was able to absorb them too. He grew until he blotted out the sun, and then he shot for the moon. He destroyed New Tempest's moon and launched a piece of it at the planet's surface. The resulting collision destroyed the Tempestro's city of Garragon and kicked up storms of dust, rock, and fire that killed thousands of Tempestro, Yeehat, and animals. The Tempestro had already abandoned one homeworld, and they weren't going to turn their backs on the Yeehat either, so against all odds, they stayed put on New Tempest. They would have been wiped out had Nar Jagath not set his sights on the Muavine and left. The Tempestro lived, but they were changed. They rejected what little technology they had begun to use and became even more primitive, spiritual, and austere than they had been even in the galaxy's golden age. Before committing fully to primitivism, they built a large temple to house their knowledge, and bred animals called garagons, named after the city that Nar-Jaggoth had destroyed, to guard it. Eventually, though, the Tempestro decided to bury the horrors of the past, and by the end of the Twilight Wars, the elder Tempestro had begun teaching the youths a sanitized version of their history. The later generations were forbidden from visiting the temple, and were taught that their species had always lived on their current homeworld. Nar-Jaggoth was scrubbed from their stories, his role replaced by a random meteor strike. Millennia passed, and the Tempestro became a footnote to the rest of the galaxy. Just another random tribal species from a random primitive planet. However, the Tempestro would not go uncontacted forever. 1 year after the Battle of Yavin, an Imperial scout named Kryn Koda arrived on New Tempest. He discovered that the Tempestro were suffering from a disease that threatened to wipe out their entire species. In a shocking display of benevolence for an Imperial, Koda used the technology at his disposal to cure the disease and save the entire Tempestro population. The Tempestro were deeply thankful. They renamed their planet Koda's World in his honor, and bequeathed to him the Eye of Koda, a curious amulet that was both a map and the key to the Tempestro's temple. Koda mysteriously vanished before he could figure out the Eye's true purpose, and it passed from owner to owner, bringing misfortune and death with it. It eventually found its way back to Koda's world 6 years later, in the hands of the dark sorcerer Dar Bulwin. Bulwin used it to unlock the temple, but the temple's guardian deemed him unworthy. To prevent Bulwin, or others like him, from learning the secrets of the Tempestro, the guardian collapsed the temple, killing Bulwin and burying all of the Tempestro's ancient knowledge with him. The Tempestro first appeared in The Prize, a scout adventure, from Galaxy Guide 8 by Bill Smith and Bill Olmsdahl, which was published in 1993 by West End Games. As is the case with many aliens that only appeared in print material, there's a discrepancy in the depiction of the Tempestro. The first illustration, from Galaxy Guide 8, depicts them as upright pterosaurs, while a later illustration, from the Alien Encounters guidebook from 1998, depicts them as winged iguana-like creatures. I went with the former depiction, as that matches how they're described in Supernatural Encounters and its tie-in material, as well as on Wikipedia. As there is no officially defined color palette for the Tempestro, I decided to let my imagination run wild with colors and patterns. The Abominor, who I've already discussed in my video on the Muad'Dib, first appeared in the Star Wars Droids episode The Great Heap. Their leader, Nar-Jaggoth, is playfully conflated with Sinistar from the 1983 arcade game of the same name. As a result, I used Sinistar as the inspiration for his look. I originally intended for this drawing to be a literal scene depicting what happened when the Abominor attacked New Tempest. However, as I worked on the drawing, I decided to change it to a more fantastical, representational work, depicting a Tempestro storyteller retelling the events of the fateful day when the Abominor came and changed the Tempestro's world forever. And now, here is the finished piece. I wanted to go all out on the colors, like I said earlier, because there's no official depiction of the Tempestro, so why not have fun with it? It may be a little hard to notice, but I made the Eye of Koda blue, not only to contrast with the orange color of the Tempestro who's wearing it, but also in reference to the Hope Diamond, another piece of blue jewelry that is rumored to bring misfortune and death to those who carry it. And that's all I have to say for the Tempestro. I hope you all watching this video like this drawing as much as I do, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, peace out, and may the force be with you. This is Jonathan, signing off.